Good evening, everyone. I'm Diane McFarland. I'm Dean of the College of Journalism and Communications, and it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to this very special occasion. Tonight, we are launching our new Great Storytellers series with one of the greatest storytellers in the world today, our own Michael Connelly. When I called Mike and asked him if he would be willing to come for this event sometime in the fall, it was such a typical reaction of Mike. He very graciously explained to me how his schedule looked. He's got his next book, his 28th book, The Crossings, coming out in November. He is in the middle of filming the second season of Bosch, and he's on the set in LA on a regular basis. And then he asked me, could you do it on a Friday or a Monday? Done. So here we are, and I've got to tell you, the real reason why Michael Connelly is here tonight is because he is a Florida Gator, he is a CJC grad, and he remains very devoted to his alma mater. Otherwise, we would never get somebody of his stature to open this event. To call Michael a best-selling author is an understatement. He has, as I mentioned, written 28 books, and he's sold over 60 million copies of his books worldwide. 60 million copies. He's been on the New York Times bestseller list many times. He has more awards than I have time to share with you tonight. He is truly one of the most accomplished storytellers at living today. But let me tell you the primary reason why we invited Michael to kick off this series tonight. Because we could not think of anyone more perfect to set the mold for this new series about storytelling. Professor Mike Foley is going to get at what makes Mike such a great storyteller. But there's another reason why he was ideal for this series, and that's because he's so versatile as a storyteller. He has told stories through multiple methods. He started as a newspaper reporter covering crime and corruption in South Florida and Los Angeles. Then he turned to writing fiction and embraced all forms of media, print, ebooks, audio, and film. His earliest books were followed in fairly short order by two movies, Blood Work, the Clint Eastwood movie, and The Lincoln Lawyer. He has done a documentary, and Bosch has the distinction of being Amazon Studios' first original drama series. He even tells stories through jazz by personally selecting the music that will underscore his productions. He is a man of many voices and great dimensions, and it is important to add, he is also an all-around great guy and a devoted family man, and of course a diehard Gator. Please note that we will be live streaming this event, so if you would, silence your phones, but don't put your phones away because we encourage you to tweet, and our hashtags are hashtag Michael Connelly and hashtag Great Storytellers. So without further ado, here is great storyteller Michael Connelly and another CJC star, Mike Foley.
Thank you, Diane. Michael, it's good to see you as always.
Thanks for having me back.
It's been a while since you graduated, like 35 years.
Yes.
How does it feel to be back?
It's always fun to come back here. I come back a lot for sporting events, but it's really special to come back to the school I graduated from. You and I mostly, and Diane mostly went to school in the stadium. But my last semester was here, and my last class as a Gator was in this room, so it's kind of cool. And it's also probably the first time you ever worn a sport coat in this room, so that should be noted as well.
It's terrible when you dress up and people make fun of you. So you started here many years ago,
Right.
As an engineering major.
Right.
What changed your mind? And thank you for doing so.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it was what happens to every student comes that, a process occurs when you get to a great campus and you start taking in ideas and doing some stuff for yourself. There's so much about high school that is prescribed, and I got up here and I can still remember spending a lot of time in the stacks of the library going through the actual physical Rolling Stone magazines, and I read every one that had been printed up until that point. And I was reading people like Hunter Thompson and Joe Esterhaus, and these things were very influential. And so through reading and kind of throwing out a net in terms of the reading I was doing up here, it switched me, and I started thinking about being a storyteller.
You tell this story about going to Dollar Movie Night at the Rights Union and being inspired.
Yeah, maybe they still do it, but they used to show, back then, this is so old, they didn't have things like DVD and cable. So if you missed an R-rated movie, you missed the movie, so I caught up on R-rated movies on Mondays here for $1, and they would have somebody come over from the fledgling film school to introduce the film. And so I saw The Long Goodbye, which was a 1973 film. I probably saw it in 74, 75. And it was based on a Raymond Chandler book, and that led me to the book. Part of my throwing the net out on the reading. Reading that book made me stop going to classes, and I read all of Chandler's novels, all in about a 2-week period. Very intense immersion into these private detective novels, and when I came out of it, that's when I said I think I need to change my major, and I want to go in this direction.
How does your family take that you were changing from engineering to journalism and creative writing?
Well, I was actually in building construction engineering, and that's what my father did. He built houses, and so the long-range plan, he worked for his father, and then came to Florida and started his own business, and then I was going to go in with him. So I drove down to Fort Lauderdale with a lot of trepidation in my heart, thinking this wasn't going to go over very well, but it actually ended up going over really well, better than anything I could have hoped for, and my parents were totally behind this. That's when it was revealed to me that my father was a frustrated artist, that he had wanted to be a painter, but he had started having people like me in his life, and he had to support them. So he went to work for his dad. So when his son came and said, I want to pursue this artistic thing, he was totally supportive of it. And it was his idea, like, don't go back up there and go into creative writing or English. Why don't you be because I wanted to specifically write about crime, because, I grew up in South Florida at the time that the crime was rampant because of the drugs and so forth. So he had the idea to go back and go into journalism, and that might put you in, if you can get on the crime beat, you get into the world of police and crime and courts, and you'd learn the world you want to write about in fiction. And his idea was, it's all about getting into a position to take the shot. Do your best to get in a position to be able to try to write a novel. And it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, you'd say the rest is history. I think that's terrific. This is all about the art of storytelling. Take us through the process when you're getting ready to write a book. Ideas, first steps.
Well, you never know where inspiration will come from. I've had a kind of a long history. So of these 28 books, I probably have 28 different stories of how they came about. And so you're always in a position to be inspired. That's what I say. So they're way beyond sources. My friends are people that I write about, detectives and lawyers and judges and things like that. And I'm not there with a recorder or a notebook, but I hang out with them. And everybody's a good storyteller. I mean, that's probably what the bottom line of what this program is about. Everyone has stories to tell. And I think I have luckily I have a facility where I have an ear for the stories that I can harness and spend a year with and go the distance with and write 100,000 words about. And so again, going back to something my father said, is I always put myself in a position to be inspired. I always put myself in a position to get that next story. And sometimes they come very luckily. Sometimes they're hard work. I like to think that my books revolve around the characters. Yes, there's a puzzle or a mystery in there that has to be solved or revealed, but that's just a framework about a character trying to make sense of this world, and so it usually starts with that, and research.
I know you enjoy your success, but do you enjoy the work itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think to keep the pace that I do, I would only be doing it if I get daily fulfillment. It's not about, oh, here's this year's book, I'm holding it in my hand. That is a great moment, but you kind of build your life so that, I don't, I've heard other writers say, like, I have to write 2,000 words a day, or I have to do this. All I want to do is feel fulfilled that I've moved the story I'm writing a step forward. And that can be anything. Might only be a paragraph, but if it's a really damn good paragraph, you're fulfilled. And so you got to get that every day. And, I get very, cranky and so forth if I don't feel like I'm getting that. And so to me, that's what it's about. If I get that every day, I definitely will have a book by the end of that year.
Terrific. Have you ever, I always wondered this about a writer, have you ever written a story and you're deeply into it and all of a sudden you realize, I can't get out of this. This is impossible. I'm stuck. I've painted myself into a corner.
Oh, yeah, it's happened a couple times. What I try to, for the most part, I write about this detective named Harry Bosch. And so when I'm not writing about him, when I instinctively know I should take a break from him and write something else, I usually try to set up a challenge. And I have a brother who's in the scientist, in that kind of community, and I love his logic and the way he problem solves. And so I wanted to write about a scientist who gets caught up in a mystery, and I started writing that, and I wrote about 300 pages into that book when I realized it just wasn't working. And there was parts of that book that were working, but it came down to the character. I didn't really know that world the way I know a detective or maybe a defense attorney. And so I had to basically back out and change that. And that's where the book Bloodwork came from. Originally, that was about a scientist who got a heart transplant and wanted to know where it came from. And I changed it to an FBI agent, which was like going back to my turf or my comfort zone. And that's, so that was like a long summer of discontent where I'm like 250 pages in and I can tell something's wrong. And I had a friend read it, and he goes, "Yeah, you gotta rethink this." And so I did.
I understand you have a ritual before you write anything about Los Angeles. You like to read chapter 13 in Raymond Chandler's book, The Little Sister, published in 1949. Please explain.
Well, I mean, again, you're always looking for inspiration, and to me, the hardest part, I was asked this earlier today, what's the hardest part about writing? And to me, it's when you have 0 words and 0 pages, and you've got to start to write a story and build that kind of momentum. And so you look for anything that will inspire that. And Raymond Chandler, from the moment I dropped out of classes and was reading him here at Florida, he's been my favorite writer. And in a book called The Little Sister, chapter 13 has nothing to do with plot. It's all about character in the city. And it's about the protagonist who's frustrated by the day's events and takes a drive, and he writes, the chapter is about what he sees on this drive, and it's beautiful writing, and it holds up. Like you said, it was written 66 years ago, and it's a great description of LA right now. So if you can write something that transcends time and is there way after you're dead, that's art to me. And so I read that because I'll never make that, but that's the goal, to be somebody like that.
I encourage you can find it on the internet. Just type in chapter 13, Raymond Chandler, The Little Sister. I read it, and it's gritty and the best descriptive writing about the city of LA in that time, but it's very modern also. When you're starting a book, starting a story, do you know how it's going to end before you start it?
Yeah, that's the one thing I have. I've kind of synthesized how I write over the many books and so forth, and essentially I start with an idea or an inciting moment, the crime that's going to be solved, the case that's going to be defended if it's a Lincoln lawyer book. So I have that, and then I have where it's going to end up. I have A and Z, and all the letters in between I discover as I'm going.
Interesting. Bosch had the biggest debut weekend among all Amazon original stories. It was the most watched title on Prime Instant Video. You feel pretty good about that?
Yeah, because you left out that they only have 5 shows.
I was
No.
being nice, Michael.
It was very fulfilling because what happened was the fans of my books came over and watched it, and that ensured its success. And so that was really cool that everyone was supportive of it, and got a season going out of it. Now we're on our 2nd season, and hopefully we'll be around for a while.
Has the success of that show changed your life?
No, you mean like financially?
No. I would not pry. No, I mean in terms of your writing and your home life, and you live in dual.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely. I always write about Los Angeles. I've always had a presence there and gone out there quite a bit. But for the show, I had this opportunity, to be involved and to help control it and form it. And I didn't want to turn that down. So it was cost me a lot of time with family and in Florida. And so that was a big change. I think what we came up with, has my fingerprints on it, so I'm glad I did it. It's changed me in terms of writing my books too. I have a book coming out in a couple months, a Harry Bosch book, and most of those books, in fact, all of them since the first one, are strictly Harry's point of view. And when we were making the show, we had to break out of his point of view just to show other characters in his life on their own. And so when I wrote this book, I did have a narrative that switched around, and I think that's a direct influence of the TV show.
So now you're writing for TV too. When you write your books, you turn it over to your editor and your agent, and I'm sure they consult with you before they do anything to it. How do you feel about turning your work over to someone else to actually make?
It's a gamble, and the best you can do is try to pick people that you respect, that you know from their previous work, they know what they're doing, and then there's a lot of hoping for the best. My presence there has helped a lot. We've got 8 writers on the show, well 7 plus me. So when I'm in that room there, everyone has good ideas. They come from great shows. They got great pedigrees, and they worked on Mad Men, Sopranos, stuff like that. But what I'm lucky about is that they want to be loyal to the books, and they want to be loyal to me. And if I'm sitting there, they're more likely to stay within the confines of my stories. So it's good.
The lead character, Harry Bosch, is played by a man named Titus Welliver. Where did he come from?
He's a journeyman character actor. He's not a traditionally looking guy, so he kind of stands out. People, when they see him, they go, "Oh, you're the guy in that," like you're the guy in Lost or The Good Wife. And he's been all over the place, and but he has some kind of inner turmoil that comes out in his demeanor, in his eyes. So I saw him in a lot of stuff, and so when we were casting the show, I threw his name into the ring, and we talked to a lot of people, auditioned a lot of different people but when he came through, he got it on the spot. He just was dead on in his interpretation in an audition, and then he sat with us and talked about his take on the character from having read the books. And he's an actor, so I don't know if he actually had read the books, but he sure was convincing. So he left the room, and usually, you do like 6 or 7 of those in a row, and then you talk about him. And he left the room, and our nuts and bolts producer goes, "That was Harry Bosch." And I said, "I think it was," and then everyone else said, "That's him." And so we kind of just stopped the process and hired him.
At first I was unsure, but then about 10, 15 minutes in, I said, "It's really the guy. That's him." Really good.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't resemble the guy in the books
No.
physically. He resembles him internally. He has, I feel guilty of taking advantage of this. The actor's had a very difficult life. He had a brother that was murdered. He had a sister who drowned. He had a wife who died of cancer very young, and he carries that inside, and it comes out. And I feel like we're kidnapping it, and we're using it for Harry Bosch, but it's there.
He must like it. He said that Bosch was the quote unquote richest character he's ever played.
I wrote that for him.
Terrific actor, yes indeed. The difference between writing a book and writing a script.
You know, and now I travel in this world where I know a lot of script writers, and I think, and they all say, God, it must be so hard to write a book. And I'm the guy who's written a lot of books, and I come to this kind of late, and it's like me. It's so hard to write a script. To me, I have the greatest thing in writing a book because I can go inside people's heads and I can tell what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And you don't have that dimension in a script. You can only write. You got to somehow communicate that through what they say and what they do. And and I have that in books. So I have 3 things in books. They have 2, and to me, that has been the most difficult transition. And it's tough to do. And when we were adapting the books for the show, we had to go into the books and find places where that happens, that process happens, where Harry is revealing of himself through action and dialogue. And it's difficult. I find it very difficult to do it well.
What books is season 2 based on?
The main one is Trunk Music, but it has The Last Coyote in it, which is, to me, my favorite Bosch book. And then, now I'm even forgetting what the third one was. We have a little bit of another book. Oh, it's called The Drop.
What does Michael Connelly have in common with Harry Bosch?
Depends on which Harry Bosch you're talking about. At the start of writing him, I as a who knows if you're ever going to get published. So in case I didn't get published, I wanted it to be a fun experience, and so I was deliberately choosing to write about someone quite different from me. So anytime I had to make a choice, I chose the opposite of me, like a guy who's has trouble with relationships, has never been married. I've been married a long time. A guy who is an orphan. I come from a family of 6 kids, all graduates of the University of Florida, by the way.
Go Gators.
Yeah, and so he's quite different from me. The only thing we had in common in the first couple books was that we were both left-handed, and that was just part of trying to delineate him as an outsider. It's kind of a right-handed society. I made him a smoker. I'm not a smoker, but smokers have to go outside. I just did all these things to make him, to build that character, and it was quite different from me. And then over time, got lucky, got published. They wanted more books, more stories, and this guy you hold at arm's length, you little by little put your arm around them. And like now we have teenage daughters the same age, and oddly enough, his daughter has said some of the same stuff my daughter has said. And,
what a coincidence.
Yeah. I remember when she was real little, I was riding, and my daughter was in the back seat in a car seat, and just out of the blue, she goes, "Dad, is the Burger King and the Dairy Queen married?" And I knew, okay, that's going in a book.
How does she feel about your books?
Well, because I'm stealing from her right and left, I don't encourage her to read them. So she's only read a few of them, and she hasn't said anything. Hasn't said anything bad. So.
You are the executive producer of a TV show. Do you watch TV?
Yeah, in TV, I think I'm one of the believers in that TV's where it's at right now, and especially in the long form examination of character. It's I faced a thing where my Bosch books have been tied up for more than a decade on a deal I made that nothing ever happened. But when I gave them back, or when I was giving them back, I didn't even think for a minute about, let me see if I can get a 2-hour movie to capture Harry Bosch, who I've written 16 or 17 books about. I just right away thought long form television, serialized television, where I can have hours, not just 2 hours to tell a story, and then maybe the chance of another season and more hours. So I really, that came out of me watching TV. I'm not saying I'm watching it all the time, but I watch a lot of it.
That was your first deal with Hollywood, was with Paramount. And
Right.
why did you make that deal?
I just, if you're a storyteller, you're a storyteller, and that shouldn't be any form of media. I think, and there's that reason, creative reasons. I am, as a writer, equally been inspired by film as I have been by the written word, and so there's just that hope that I could be at least the underlying creator of something that would be good. And then there's money.
Yeah.
I was a reporter by day and writing novels by night, and it was a deal that could get me out of one of those jobs. And I felt that the split focus on my writing was hurting it, and that if I could have, I had taken a sabbatical, a 3-month sabbatical from my newspaper job to really intensely write on a book. And then when I did that, I could tell if I could have a solo focus on this, I might move up a couple levels. And so that was probably the main reason.
It's a big gamble.
Well, you actually figure it out. Like, they're paying me this much. That means I don't have to go back to work at a newspaper for 3 years. That's really what it was. I got like 3 years pay. So I talked over with my wife, and it was like, that's a gamble, but 3 years, I mean, you should be able to establish yourself as a book writer.
Well, you have done that. You are a successful novelist. You are a successful executive producer of a big hit TV series. Do you ever miss journalism?
I miss aspects of it. I always have missed the newsroom and the camaraderie and pranks and all that stuff that's in the newsroom. Miss that a lot. There's a lot of stuff, in fact, I don't even remember it anymore. You kind of blank out the stuff you don't like. And then the
Right.
fulfillment of it, I still get it, believe it or not. My books are fiction, but I think they're an accurate accounting of Los Angeles geographically, emotionally. I think they're an accurate accounting of the politics of the police department, and the underlying, I mean, especially now where there's so much attention to cops doing the wrong thing, which is, I have no argument with. That's what should be brought to public light. But the people who know that's what's going to happen, and that they'll get painted by that same brush, and yet do their work and do it well. I mean, there's an underlying nobility or a hidden nobility in that I think I'm getting through Harry Bosch, and there's some reporting in that. Yes, it's made up, but to my knowledge or feeling, there's reporting in that, and so therefore, I don't pine for my job in journalism.
You do. The central character in your hit book is Harry Bosch, a police lieutenant in Los Angeles, and he has headstrong and doesn't like authority and all that kind of stuff. Do the cops in L.A. like your books?
I think they do on certain levels, and then when you get into the brass, there's less agreement. But I have to say, when we started making this show, we went to the LAPD to see if we could get some cooperation, and it was off the charts. They opened their doors, and that started with the police chief, who, way back when I was a reporter, was just a detective and knew me then and knew my books, and so we were the first and only TV production to ever film in the real Hollywood Detective Bureau, the first one to ever film in the real lab, and we seemed to have ongoing access. I think they didn't realize we'd get a second season, so so we're probably going to become a nuisance, but initially it was quite rewarding that Harry Bosch had opened those doors for us.
It's terrific. From this very stage, I preach to my students in my reporting class the importance of details, and how that makes a story real. It makes it come alive. And I notice your books are filled with details. How did you learn to do that?
I think it was being a reporter. I mean, my idea about Harry Bosch, or all my books, are this character is wholly made up. He's fictional. But if I anchor him in a real world and I make it as real as I can, then that's going to help sell him to the reader so that they'll be subconsciously nodding their head as they read that they believe it, that this is how it is done, this is that world accurately portrayed. And, and that's the goal. And so, one, as I call it, a telling detail, one telling detail is so much better than 100 basic words of description. If you can find one little thing. I put a thing in the story just yesterday. Actually, this was in the script, but the cop told me that when they have a shooting and they pick up the police casings, when they find that the casings are multiple brands, they immediately ascribe it to a gang shooting because ammo is so hard to come by and expensive and legal and to come by legally in the gang territories. It's a signature, and that to me, when that turns up in the script this year, I think people are going to go, "Wow, I guess that's right," and that's what you look for. You surround the made up stuff with the good stuff.
You have a lot of characters in your books. How do you come up with the names for these characters? For example, it just popped into my mind. In the Scarecrow, there's a Professor Foley from the University of Florida. Where do these come from?
They're all tests to see if people really are reading my books. And he didn't tell me he knew about that till 3 years after that book came out.
That's not true. So not true. I was reading the book at home on a Saturday. My wife was out. Nobody else was there. And I read that. I said, holy, what the heck is this? And I had nobody to tell. It was driving me crazy. But I've auctioned off your characters' names for charities and things like that.
Yeah, I've done that. I try to only do one a book because names are important.
Yeah.
They can add mystery. You can use a misdirect. I remember I used the name. I called somebody Bonnie Fox, and I knew the reader would go, Fox. Oh, she did it. That kind of thing. So, so they're important, and also the way they sound. So I do spend a lot of time with names. And I don't think there's any throwaway names. And, so they're important to story. They're important to honor people who have supported you. And, so I do that for a charitable thing, but you don't want to get a whole bunch of names. And then one of the last charities I did, the guy who won, his real name was Gunn. His name was Gunn something. And it's kind of like, oh man, everyone's going to think this guy did it and all this stuff. It's like, and I had to find a way to call a guy named Gunn into my book.
Okay, when you're writing, what's a typical day, or is there a typical day?
Well, there's a typical routine to a year or to writing a book. I mean, like I said before, it's very hard to get going. And so you have lesser hours. And so as you get momentum and you get pages, my hours expand, and they usually expand earlier. I start getting up earlier and earlier, and so when you really have major momentum and everything's coming together, I spend as many hours as I can without shirking certain responsibilities and so forth in my life. But starting out, it might be like a 2 or 3 hour day. And then it will become eventually a 14-hour day. And then it depends on what I'm writing. With Bosch books, I feel like I have a sense of that world and how things would go. So I write, and I'm shooting texts and emails off to cops I know, like, what would you do in this situation, or what's this, and what's that? But I keep moving. I keep writing. When I write about the Lincoln Lawyer, Mickey Haller, those books take more research because I don't feel as grounded or as comfortable about the law. So I have a couple of attorneys that help me. One of them's here from Gainesville. Few people know the Lincoln Lawyer is based on a lawyer sitting right there who operates here in Gainesville. And I do mean operate. But but I'm always hitting him up with scenarios like, this is what I need to have happen. And the thing I have learned about writing The Lincoln Lawyer is that the law is very subjective, because I'll get a scenario from my cadre of lawyers and it will work, and then I'll invariably go out on the road to promote a book, and lawyers will say, hey, that's a great idea, I'm going to use that. And then some lawyers will say that would never happen, and that would get thrown out and all this stuff. And it's like you can't please everybody when it comes to the law.
For those of you who haven't read The Lincoln Lawyer, and I'm certain there aren't any of them here, where did the idea of a lawyer operating out of the back of a Lincoln, his office in the back seat of a car, come from?
It was serendipity. I went to the opening day of the LA Dodgers baseball season, and it's always a day game, and the Dodger Stadium is not too far from downtown, so all these people play hooky from businesses. So on the first day, you see a lot of people in white shirts and ties at a baseball game, and I was sitting next to a guy, so I just struck up a conversation like, where are you playing hooky from? And he said he was a lawyer, and I said, where's your office? He said, I don't really have one. I work out of my car. And I must have had some kind of body, like I may have moved a little bit away from him or something. And he goes, no, I'm actually a very good lawyer, successful lawyer. And he said, this is the best way to do it in this town because there's 40 courthouses, and I move freely from them, and I can meet clients wherever they are. And he talked about how he had a printer in the car and everything set up, and a client who's working off his bill driving him. And it was like all at once I got the framework for like a good story. And the weird thing about it was this was in 2001. The book came out in 2005, and the movie came out in 2011. And back then in 2001, when he was trying to say, no, I'm quite successful, he goes, I actually live in Malibu, and my neighbor's Matthew McConaughey. And then 10 years later, his neighbor was portraying a character, kind of spawned by him. But I didn't know him that well. That was it. I met him at the baseball game. So then I started hanging out with Dan Daly here. And the nuts and bolts of the character and a lot of the anecdotal stories came from Dan and his partner.
One of my students came up after the session this afternoon and said, did he really hang out with Matthew McConaughey?
I had very little to do with that movie, but he was very cool. He knew it was based on the book, obviously. So he said to what normally happens in Hollywood is they take your book and say, we'll handle it from here, which is the opposite of common sense. And so McConaughey signed on and goes like, this is based on the book, so where's that guy? Because I bet you he's a lawyer, or he based this book on the lawyers, and I want to meet those lawyers. And so he was the one who drew me into it on a very peripheral way, and he met Dan and his partner. And what impressed me most about McConaughey is, he's a very good actor, and that means he can project things very sincerely. But I don't know if he really understood everything about the law that's in the books. And so this was like one of these serendipity things. He wanted me by his side when he did media to promote the thing. So there I was next to McConaughey getting in on all these interviews, and it was pretty nice. So,
pretty nice. The master of...
I think it sold a few of the books.
The master of understatement. You mentioned earlier your favorite book. Why?
What was my favorite book?
I don't remember, but you mentioned it.
Oh, my book of my books.
Favorite, yeah.
The Last Coyote. It's not because it's my most accomplished book, because I hope it's not, because it's my fourth book, and I've done 24 since then. So hopefully I've gotten better, but it's really the most character-driven story about Harry Bosch. It's about his origin, and it's about, his mother was murdered, and it's about him looking into that case. And it's really about what drives him, what's made him relentless, what's made him damaged, what's made him unwilling to be stopped by obstacles. And these are characteristics that I think connect him to readers, because we all want to be like that in our real lives. And it gets into that. And it's also one of my favorite titles because of what it means in the story, that he's kind of a dying breed. And, it all kind of came together. And that was the first book I wrote after taking that money from Paramount and being a full-time writer. So it was a year I reveled in. And it also happened to be the year of the O.J. Simpson case. And so on the day O.J. Simpson was arrested, I'm sitting at my house being a novelist. I'm actually writing a novel full-time. And, my wife says, you got to see this. And I go out and watch the TV, and there I saw the reporter I trained to take my place in the middle of this giant pack of reporters. And I was so happy that was him and I was here. So.
I can't imagine it again, but if there's someone out there in the audience who has yet to read one of your books, what would you recommend to start with?
Well, like I just said, you get better at anything the more you do it. So I would look at newer books. I would say like maybe The Lincoln Lawyer, because I think that series, there's 5 or 6 of those that are I'm really proud of, and it might be good to start with the first one. Or Echo Park is a more recent Harry Bosch book that I think I feel really good about. I don't. It's weird. You have a set of things you want to accomplish with a book before you write it, and then there's an assessment. It usually comes a couple years later because I don't immediately want to reread my books because for a year I've been intensively involved in that story, and the last thing I want to do is read it again. So usually about 2 years later, I'll read a book for the first time as a real book. I actually read it as a book. And that's when I make an assessment, how close I came. I've never gotten 100% on anything, but The Lincoln Lawyer's up there and Echo Park is up there. So.
When you moved to L.A., or when you went out to L.A., you were looking for a specific place to live, but somebody had beaten you to it. Explain that.
Well, if you go under the heading of you look for inspiration wherever you can get it, there was the movie we talked about, the Long Goodbye. The detective in the movie had a really cool 1-bedroom pad with a little bit of view of Hollywood in this interesting architectural building that's kind of built up the side of a hill. So I this is before internet and you can just Google where something is. I actually had to put on my reporter's hat and actually find this place, and then I knocked on the door and said, is that specific apartment available? And the guy said, like, kind of get in line, like every writer who comes into town he knocks on my door. But I was working at the LA Times, so I gave him my business card. I said, well, if ever comes up, call me, and I'm probably going to rent it. And so then I went and found another place, and like 10 years went by, and he called, and I was no longer a reporter, but he called the number on it, and he got the city desk, and just by serendipity, the person who took the call is still someone I'm in touch with. So she was able to hook me up, and I rented it. And it happened to be when I was moving back to Florida, and I was looking for a place when I would come back to LA where I could land and write and so forth. And so I rented that and had it for a few years. And while I was there, would-be writers would knock on my door and see if they could come in and take a picture or, that kind of thing. And some that were pretty accomplished. A guy named Frank Darabont, who has written and directed some pretty good movies, came by. So there's a whole disciplehood of people who love that film and were inspired by it.
Did it do any good?
Did what?
Did it inspire you?
Yeah. I mean, the problem was, as with all of LA, there was no parking. And that really was a drag. So I only kept it about 3 years.
Do you read? Do you have time?
I don't read. I'm here because I was a reader, and the deep dive into all this stuff. The sad part is that I can write in situations where most people read, like on a plane, in bed, in a car, whatever. And so I have this opportunity to do this for a living, and so I take full advantage of it. So my reading time is dramatically less than it was when I was a teenager or in my 20s or even my 30s.
What do you like to read when you have time?
Well, on one hand, I feel like I read a lot of stuff that's set in L.A. just because I should keep up on it. If I was going to sit by a pool and read something, I'd like to read a biography of a musician or an artist. That would be my top thing to look for. But I'm in this genre, so I should know what's out there. So I jump around. I don't read anybody too religiously anymore.
In addition to his producing and writing, Michael is a actor also. On Castle, the TV show, playing poker with some of the other writers. Do you still do that? And did you ever join the Screen Actors Guild?
Yeah, you have to join if you appear twice, and so I've been on Castle 4 times, so I do have that second career.
Oh, didn't you write one of the scenes?
No, everyone thinks I did. I'm actually really mean to a neophyte writer, and people somehow ascribe me to having written that scene myself. And it's like I would never be that mean to another writer.
Oh, it's out there. That thought is out there on
Yeah.
the never-ending internet.
Well, the line this guy he's been asked to join the poker table, and he's only written one book. And I say to him, you know what I did after I wrote my first book? And he goes, what? I go, I wrote 20. I shut up and I wrote 23 more. I would never say that in real life.
All right. I'm sure in this room there are a bunch of wannabe writers who admire you. And you got any advice for them?
You know, it's funny. I took a class from the great Harry Crews here, and the only thing I remember from that class is he said, if you're going to be a writer, then you got to write every day, even if it's only for 15 minutes. And that last part is a key thing, you know, because even if you only write for 15 minutes, your story, it won't settle to the bottom. It will keep circulating. And so I thought that was great advice. I would add, like, you know, keep your head down. You know, don't lick your finger and hold it up to see which way the winds of commerciality or whatever blow. Just keep your head down and write. If you're going to be a writer, keep your head down and write, even if it's only 15 minutes a day.
How about this? Do you have any advice for journalism majors?
I think you're in I don't know if it's advice or it's just a commentary, but I think it's a great time because of the diversity of media outlets and how news is delivered and consumed. A lot of opportunity. And I think, no matter, as far as being a journalism student, what you're doing here is learning how to tell a story. And that skill is something that will serve you no matter whatever you end up doing in life. Being able to tell a story well is really invaluable. So I think it's a great starting point if you're in this school.
You have had 3 careers. You were a journalist, you were a writer, and now you're an executive producer. Is there a 4th career? Is there something you've always wanted to do but haven't done yet? I know you want to do another 4 seasons of Bosch.
I don't come here that often. Whenever you ask me or invite me, I try to come. I do love doing this. It's weird. Maybe.
Me too.
I have a hard time communicating what I do, so I don't know if I'd be a good teacher. Or I kind of think I probably wouldn't be, but I would like, if I was going to pick a 4th career, that would be it.
Interesting. Take a note. All right. This is my last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. So if you got something on your mind, you'll have a chance for the next minutes or so. Your next book is The Crossing, comes out November 3rd, and it features both Harry Bosch and Mickey Haller. Is that true?
Yeah.
What's it about?
It's more a Bosch book than anything else. It's really, he's much older than the guy in the TV show, and it's about the end of his career. And the crossing has different meanings at different times. But one of the meanings is him crossing over to the other side. He's no longer an investigator with a badge and a gun. And he works on a case. He crosses the aisle and works on a case for Mickey Haller.
Oh, interesting. Well, I can't wait. I don't know about you guys. I can't wait. All right. We have a young woman over here with a microphone. If you have a question, please raise your hand and she will come to you. Don't all raise your hand at once. Oh, there we are. Okay.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Josephine Fuller, and I'm a first-year journalism major. And in today's society, every time you hear about a cop, it seems to be in bad light, and with this big issue of police brutality. Do you feel like it's at all harder to sell your books that are about a detective in true crime when it seems that society's opinion of these public figures are slightly turning negative?
Um, yeah, I kind of touched on that before. I don't think so because I think there's always another side to the story and any story. But for the most part, I write about this guy who, despite all kinds of pressures, he hasn't fallen. He hasn't fallen into what you see is happening in these kind of cases. And so I think it actually, in some way, props up the heroism in what he's doing, the nobility in what he's doing. Not all cops are bad. So this is a story about a cop who doesn't take those kind of easy ways out or treat people that way. Harry Bosch, from the beginning is kind of had a personal code that everybody counts or nobody counts. And that's the message in these books. And I think when you see what's happening in places like Ferguson and New York and Baltimore, if they remembered that or if they knew that in the first place, maybe some of that stuff wouldn't have happened.
Uh-oh. Looks like technical difficulties
I
for
can
me to
prob-
say.
I can probably hear people.
Hello? Okay.
Hey.
So my question is actually, with the production house that you're actually working with to make the show, how did you become so involved? Did they approach you and ask you to be involved in the project, or did you approach them and say, hey, I want to turn this into a television show? Because I think the biggest mistake on most developing books into TV or movies is that they don't involve the writer as much.
Right. No, yeah, I agree with you. That is the problem. And so it was a long 12 years to wait to get my stuff back, my books back, but I accrued leverage. I wrote more books and I sold more books, and I had The Lincoln Lawyer was a successful movie. So when I got control of my Bosch books back, suitors came to me, and I had two things. Either I wasn't going to give anyone Harry Bosch. I spent my entire life as a novelist about this character, and he's too precious to me to say good luck. Here's Harry. So the two things were, I go with this project. I'm going to have a say, and we can iron out what that say means in terms of a contract, but I'm involved. And the other thing is the books are so much about Los Angeles that every shot has to be shot in LA, and I want that in the contract. That was a bigger obstacle because the productions save a lot of money by going to other states and making it look like LA, but I can always tell. And I did my first foray into TV was like 15 years ago, where me and another reporter from the LA Times had this idea, and we sold it. We were very much on the periphery, and it was set in LA, but they shot it in Vancouver, and they had a truck that would roll up every day, and it had all these palm trees and pots in the back. And they would just put them around, and that was LA. And the show got canceled after 4 episodes, and it got what it deserved. But yeah. So, but that was a hard thing to get, the every shot in LA. So I was interviewed. I talked to everybody that was interested, and there was a guy who had one company that he thought all this somehow made common sense, and so I made a deal with him.
Hi, my name's Sam Speedy. I'm a third-year production major, and I'm starting to branch out into writing longer stories from where I used to be shorter, is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, I'm getting more ambitious ideas than I have the actual information to provide the correct details for the stories. And with 8 years as a journalist, that's a lot to draw from. But do you have any advice for what a really concise but fruitful way of research would interviewing versus going on the internet versus reading books, what would you say is the best
Oh, well,
source?
obviously, I think the best thing you can get is, face-to-face of experience. If you're going to write about a lawyer, there's tons of stuff you can accrue through books and internet and so forth. But when you sit in a courtroom and see how it really happens, and you realize this is like nothing I've ever seen on TV or in a movie, and maybe even in books, you realize that there's a lot of untouched territory that you can get for your own. So I would definitely recommend going to the source, going to the real people. And it's easy to say. It's hard to actually do, to find, especially if you're trying to get into a police department. I was lucky. I had a press pass. So the whole time I was really masquerading as a newspaper reporter. I was really researching books, and so that was my scheme. But yeah, I think you gotta talk to people because you'll hear stuff. You develop an ear for the telling details, and you'll find out about it. So that's what I would recommend.
Come on now. You're budding journalists. Ask some questions.
Hi, I'm a big fan of your books. I actually drove from Tallahassee to come. I'm Dana Edwards. I'm a former journalism alumni from UF. And I'd love if you could sign one of my books afterward,
Sure.
the Lincoln Lawyer I have. When you explained a little bit about some of the cartridges, the gunshots that you talked about for details. As far as the Mickey Haller books or even your Harry Bosch books, what are some other details that you learned just by following around other lawyers?
Oh boy, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I think the big moment, or talking about the Lincoln Lawyer, the big moment for me where that became a realistic project that I was going to write. So I had that chance meeting at the police station, at the Dodger game in like 2001, and it was right before I was moving back to Florida, and so I knew I wasn't going to spend a lot of time with the guy who gave me the idea. So I moved back to Florida, reconnected with Dan Daly, who I'd known for a long time since early journalism days, and I was little by little sampling the world, and then at one point you're looking for things that are jarring to what is preconceived through entertainment media. So I asked him, like, how many times you have a really innocent client, and he goes, like, I don't remember the exact words, and he's here, so he's going to correct me, but he more or less said, I don't want any innocent clients because they are scary, because the burden is so high. It's one thing if you're defending someone is guilty of something and is adjudicated in some way. But if someone in your heart, your client is not guilty, and you mess up and they get convicted, that's a burden that you carry to the end of your days. And so it's better to avoid that. And so when he explained that to me, that flew in the face of everything I'd seen about movies and books, because they're always about the lawyer defending the innocent, and the reality I was seeing, not only as a reporter, but in talking and researching this possible project, was different. And so that became the crux. This is the story. I'm going to take what he has just told me, and I'm going to write a whole book about it. And it's going to have this gritty sense of reality. And so became you could say the starting point was when I met the guy at the baseball game, but to me the real starting point was when he uttered the phrase, "There's no client as scary as an innocent man." That was the starting point of that book. And so you hang around, you ask questions, you watch, you listen, and then suddenly you're lucky something like that drops in your lap and you're good to go.
We got somebody down here.
I'm Taylor Gaines. I'm a senior here. I wanted to ask, like, you talked about the more you write, the better you feel like you get. Did you ever doubt that you could be a good storyteller? And at what point did you think, like, okay, I can really make something of this. I can do this well.
Those kind of doubts, you always have them. Like I'm not Mr. 100% confident even now when I write a book. And I think that's one reason why I don't go back and reread them right away, because it's like, it would freak me out probably. But, I wrote a couple books that I never sent out. So I had doubts early on, but I was able to look at them, and this was a lot of counseling from my wife, but the second one is better than the first, so you're getting there. So you find reasons to be confident or reasons to be inspired or try the next one. But writing is a very subjective thing, both from the standpoint of writing and reading, and so that something like that is always going to be fraught with second guessing and doubts, and unfortunately that's the bane of the existence of it. And it's also something that engenders commentary. You put a book out there, it's going to get reviewed, and now off the internet it will get hundreds of reviews. These are public statements about whether you blew it or you did a good job, and so that they all enter into your world of confidence or lack thereof. So eventually I learned not to read reviews anymore unless someone tells me it's really good. but I just don't think you ever get away with it. It's part of the job, and you got to learn how to deal with it, or to basically put it in this box and ignore it as much as you can.
Hi, I'm Kayla Zadie, and I'm a second-year journalism major here. So I'm assuming as a writer, you often get writer's block, or maybe not, you're on your 28th book, So when you do get that occasional block, or you don't know what to write, and maybe the inspiration hasn't quite hit you yet, what do you do to, get over the hump? Because I feel like I've been on a 4-year writer's block since high school, because I can't, you write books. I've always wanted to write a book since I was younger, but I just can never find the right topic or plot or something to truly inspire me that really makes me want to continue writing it. How do you do that? What makes you go forward?
Well, I kind of have three different answers. One is, because I went into journalism at a newspaper, there's no such thing as writer's block. You got to write, or you're not going to be at that paper anymore. Right? You were the city editor. So, I don't know how many times you as city editor, someone came up and said, "I don't have it today, chief." So I was thrown into an environment where that's not allowed, and that has helped me in my writing of books. In terms of when you're inside a project and it's not going well and you feel like you've hit a wall, to me the key is rewriting. You back up. To me, it's like a battering ram. You hit the wall, you back up, and then you hit it harder. And so I always go back a couple chapters. They might be fine, but I rewrite them anyway, and it takes me up to the point where I'm having a problem, and usually I bust right through. And that's within a project. The big scary writer's block where you don't feel you can even get going on a project, I haven't had that experience, but I think I haven't had that experience because, as I said before, part of my job is to be at the computer and writing, but a big part of my job is to always be in situations where I can be inspired. So I'm in this world of crime fiction. So, as I said before, most of the people I deal with on a day-to-day basis have some real job in that world. And, it's not like I'm constantly asking them, "Tell me about your job." They're just friends. I go to baseball games with them. I go to dinner. But I believe everybody's a good storyteller, especially when it comes to something that is about an experience they've had. And that's what I try to get at. Most of my books are inspired by an oral story. Someone has told me a story, and it's usually a story that they're involved in, that they had an involvement in. So it changes the timbre of their voice because emotion gets involved. And these things I pick up. I mean, I don't know why. It's not something I developed, but it's there. And I would say maybe 26 out of 28 times someone has told me a story, and that has given me the direction to go. So for the big picture about writer's block, I would say just keep putting yourself out there in positions where you can get inspired. Good luck.
Hi, I'm Brooke. I'm a fourth year journalism major. You spoke a little bit about your book Blood Work and how you originally had the idea to make it a scientist who wanted to know where his transplant was from. How did you let go of that character and kind of come to terms with the fact that you needed to change it to an FBI agent?
Well, like I said, it was a difficult summer, and I had a friend, another writer, a journalist that I had spent a lot of years with in the same newsroom, and then he became a book editor, so he was very much, and a book writer, so he was very much in the same world as me. And I really trusted his judgment when he read it was a big give to even ask him to read this, because I usually never let anyone read anything I have until I have a finished draft. And he was just kind of, all he did was confirm what I kind of already knew. But one thing that made it easier to give up is that it wasn't like 300 pages I didn't spike 300 pages. There was a lot of stuff. There was a kind of a plotting that I knew I could use, that when I switched in another character that I was more comfortable with, many of the moves of the plot would be the same. And I had a friend who had a heart transplant who inspired the story, and that wouldn't change. The medical story, the medical journey, and the triggers of the plot were the same no matter who it happened to. So that's how I salved the wound, I guess. I knew some of the stuff would get used. And then it stuck in my craw that I had backed away from this challenge. And so, about 5 years later, I felt I had gotten better as a writer, and I came back to that character, and I did write a book about him. And he was a scientist, much like my brother. And so I ended up writing that character didn't even get thrown away. Therefore, it was quite different when I wrote about it 5 years ago, but I did come back to it and felt like I eventually met that challenge.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Kiko. I'm a second-year master's student of advertising, and I'm wondering, as like bestseller writer, do you ever do some research about the possible reaction about your plots before you actually do the writing?
You mean like think about like how's this gonna go over? Here's an example. Someone asked if I ever abandoned. It's actually two things I've abandoned. I forgot about this other one, but I was writing. I've invested a lot in this character that's Harry Bosch's daughter, and she's had some emotional trauma in her life, and I wanted to write a book just about her, and I started writing a book about how she actually takes a gun to school because of something that's going on in the school. And I was about 100 pages into that book, and the Sandy Hook massacre happened, and I just thought this is not the right climate to put this book out. And so I put it aside thinking maybe next year, and then I just never got back to it. And my characters age in real time, and so in the book that comes out in November, she's in college, and so I kind of missed that opportunity, and so I'll never get back to that unless I invent something, a totally different character that this happens with. But I've written about her in several books, and I thought there was an emotional support within the readers so that I could do this, because it's a very risky topic to write about a protagonist who actually takes a gun to school.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Allison. I'm a grad of the college as well.
Yay.
And I was just kind of curious, what was your process like for getting that first book published? What did it take for you to get all that wrapped up and to actually get, a contract to get this published?
Well, the industry is so different now. So what happened to me doesn't really apply now because of the internet. I got published before there was really a internet that the public was using. But and it was done by mail, believe it or not. And I printed out copies and sent them out. But it's a process that reading is a subjective thing. So, and that goes for agents and publishers and so forth. So, I've had a very successful career, but I got rejected all over the place back then. But it's not like I harbor any grudges or anything. I happen to be writing a story that they weren't interested in at that time. But it was the same thing that every writer does. They send letters out to lots of agents, and you hope to get one interested, and you exaggerate your skills and your standing and all this stuff, and you get, hopefully you bait a few people to say, yeah, I'll read 50 pages, and then you hope they'll read those 50 pages and want the whole thing. And so I went through that year-long process and got an agent, and he sold it fairly quickly. I would say before that process happened, I overwrote the book. I just, it's a scary thing. You're putting your kid out there, your baby out there to be judged. And so I kind of hid from that, and I kept rewriting the book. So there's, I'm a huge believer in rewriting, but there's a point where you got to let it go out there and see what happens. And so I never did that again. I must have done 6 or 7 rewrites in that book till finally I just got tired of rewriting it, and then I finally sent it out. So I regret that, because I probably could have written another book in that period of time, and we could be talking about 29 books instead of 28. But the one funny thing about that was that there's no internet, so you don't get an email. So I'm in this stage where I've reached the point where the agent, who I created a list of agents I would be happy to be with, but I had one that was number 1, and this guy was actually reading my book. And so I never would expect an agent to call me on a Saturday, but my mother-in-law used to call on Saturdays afternoon, every Saturday. So my phone rang, and I thought, and my wife was out, so I wasn't going to talk to my mother-in-law. So I didn't take it. And this was back in the days where they had answering machines and you could hear it. And so I'm expecting her to leave a message, and it's this agent saying, yes, can you call me? And I said, holy shit. And it's like, this could be it. And then I had a long 15 minutes because I didn't want to pick up and say, no, I'm here. So I decided I'd wait 15 minutes before I call the guy back. And it was a long 15 minutes. But I called him back, and he said I want to represent the book. So.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we got time for one more. And while we're waiting for the logistics on that, I want to point out to you that Michael's been a real trooper today. He's just getting over a cold. He's been drinking stuff all day to curb his losing his voice, and I really appreciate you working like a dog today.
No, it's been fun to be back there.
This will have to be the last one. We're out of time.
Hi, my name's Sarah. I'm a senior in the telecommunications department. A little bit far from what you do, but obviously you were kind of in the field that I wish to aspire to. You've been in our shoes. You've been through this college. What would you say being so successful to us, like looking back at yourself years ago, what would you say to kind of keep us motivated when we feel kind of bogged down with classes, exams, life, and all that, and kind of just keep our passion alive and kind of drive us to keep doing what we came here in the first place to accomplish?
Well, I feel like I'm just a bag of cliches because I'll say stuff that everybody says, but I do think that you're kind of in the center of stuff. There was this feeling when I was a newspaper reporter. I mostly worked at night, did night cops, and I just loved driving home in LA. They have an elevated freeway to drive through that city, and I always felt like I was a prince of the city because I knew stuff that no one knew yet. And I think in any form of the media that you're studying here, you can get that. And it's not based on a dream or something. It's true. You are kind of at the center of what's important to society, and that's a cool place to be. And you know, as far as the cliche part is, it's like, oh my God, I wish I could think of another way of saying follow your dreams. But like I'm doing. Well, you know, one thing I'm seeing now, I'm a late bloomer when it comes to television. So I'm on a television show now, and I'm one of the bosses, but it's a city. There's 150 people working on our crew, from actors and crew members and everybody. And even to I guess the lowest rank would be called PAs, production assistants. And they're like 19 years old and 22 years old, and they're just out of Montana State Film School and stuff like that. And they're having the time of their lives. And I kind of wish that, on one hand, I like being one of the bosses, but I also wish I had tried this when I was a kid, and that I had just not taken the secure route and gone back to my hometown and gotten a job at the newspaper. I wish I had lit out for LA. I didn't lit out for LA till I was like 31 or something. And I kind of wish I did it when I was 21 and I was like one of these kids, because I think there's a lot of fun, there's a lot of creativity, and you are, you know, if society is a swirling whirlpool, you're near the center of it, and that's a cool place to be.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I don't know about you, but I found it fascinating, and I thank you very much, and I thank you, Mr. Connelly, very much.